The day Lorraine Whitmore sold us her house for $430,000, she was already planning to take it back. I didn't know that. What I knew was that I had emptied every account I had spent 20 years building. What I knew was that $537,000 of my financial life, my savings, my renovations, my entire future, was now inside those walls. What I knew was that if I lost that house, I lost everything I had ever worked for. Lorraine knew all of that too. She had calculated it in advance. In a notebook. In her own handwriting. With projected timelines and estimated breaking points. She had one fatal miscalculation. She forgot to account for her husband. I'm standing at Arthur Whitmore's 74th birthday celebration. 60 guests. Church friends. Neighbors. The relatives who spent the past year treating me like I was the problem. Lorraine is here, standing near the head table in a dusty rose silk blouse, smiling the way she always smiles when she believes she has already won. Arthur is holding a microphone. And Daniel, my husband, the man who spent 15 years choosing conflict avoidance over partnership, is about to stand up in front of every person his mother has ever cared about, impressing, and say every true thing he has never before said aloud. Stay with me through every detail of this story. Because if you're the one who does everything for your family and gets nothing but grief in return, what happened in that room is going to feel like the first full breath you've taken in years. Let me tell you where this story almost ended before I had a chance to fight back. It was a Thursday morning in March of 2023. I was at my desk at 7 a.m. I'm always at my desk early, old accounting habit. When Daniel came in from the front porch holding a certified envelope. He hadn't opened it. He was just holding it the way people hold things they already sense will be catastrophic. The return address was a law firm. Different from the ones that had been sending letters for the past 5 months. A larger firm. The kind of firm you retain when you want to communicate that the preliminary discussion is over. The letter informed us that based on the ongoing property boundary dispute filed by Lorraine Whitmore, and the outstanding claim regarding fixture ownership, a formal lease pendens notice was being prepared against our property. A lease pendens, for anyone who doesn't know the term, is a legal notice recorded against a property that signals a pending lawsuit with ownership implications. It effectively freezes the asset. You cannot sell it. You cannot refinance against it. And depending on how the associated litigation proceeds, it becomes the first documented step toward a forced resolution that does not go in the occupant's favor. In plain language, it was the opening move of a process designed to push us toward foreclosure. $537,000. That was my total exposure in that moment. The $430,000 purchase price I had paid Lorraine for the house 14 months earlier. The $68,000 renovation. A new kitchen that finally worked, updated bathrooms, and HVAC system the house had badly needed for at least a decade. The $22,000 in legal costs we had already spent fighting Lorraine's manufactured disputes over the previous 5 months. The $17,000 in emergency repairs on a roof that revealed itself as a serious structural problem 3 months after we moved in. Every dollar I had. Everything my parents had left me when they passed. 20 years of careful, disciplined saving and investing, carried carefully through a career and a marriage and a life that had not always made it easy to keep anything in reserve. One certified letter was the mechanism to remove all of it. Daniel sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He said, "Evelyn." Just my name. With the weight of a man who is finally, at 51 years old, understanding the full shape of what has been constructed around him. I said, "I need you to not call your mother." He said, "I wasn't going to." "And I need you to trust me," I said. "Not say it, actually do it. For however long this takes without questioning the plan I'm building." He looked at me for a long moment. A real look, the kind that takes inventory. Then he said, "Tell me what to do." That was the first time in 15 years that Daniel Whitmore, rather than managing the situation between me and his mother, asked me what to do. I told him to go to work. Act normal. Say nothing to anyone in his family. Then I closed the certified letter, put it in a folder, labeled the folder, and called Arthur. Let me tell you who I was before all of this, because context matters enormously. My name is Evelyn Harper, and for the majority of my adult life I was the reliable one. The dependable one. The daughter-in-law that everyone in the Whitmore family called when something needed to be handled, and then failed to remember had handled it. I spent 15 years as the infrastructure of that family's comfort. I hosted every holiday gathering at our apartment, because Lorraine's house was too nice to risk the mess. I organized the family events. I managed the gift coordination. 23 people across 2 family branches, each with their own preferences and restrictions and expectations. And I did this without a thank you note, without reimbursement, and without anyone ever once asking whether it was convenient. I knew every family birthday by heart. I remembered every dietary restriction. I sent the follow-up cards. I arranged the childcare logistics for family events that involved small children. I did the invisible work that makes visible occasions possible, and I did it well enough that no one ever had occasion to notice it was being done. When my father-in-law Arthur had his first hip surgery in 2019, I drove him to every post-operative appointment. Not Daniel, me. Because Daniel had work and Arthur trusted me, and I had the flexibility and the competence, and nobody thought to ask whether this arrangement was something I had agreed to or something that had simply solidified around me while I wasn't paying careful enough attention. When Arthur had his second hip surgery in 2021, the same arrangement resumed without discussion. The assumption that I would handle it was so complete it never needed to be stated. I was a former accountant. Methodical. Organized. I kept records of everything. That last detail is going to matter considerably before this story ends. If you are the person in your family who does everything and receives in return mostly the expectation that you will continue doing everything, stay right here. Because the next several years of my life are going to feel uncomfortably familiar. In the spring of 2022, Lorraine announced she wanted to downsize. She and Arthur were getting older, she said. The house required more maintenance than it was worth. She wanted something manageable. And she proposed generously selling the house to Daniel and me at a family price. This was presented to everyone around us as an act of love. A mother investing in her son's future. Extended family called it a wonderful opportunity. Church friends called it a blessing. Lorraine received substantial goodwill for the gesture, which I later understood was entirely intentional. The house was professionally appraised at $445,000. Lorraine offered it to us for $430,000. We paid in full. I liquidated savings. I reorganized my retirement projections. I paid for a full home inspection, a title search, 2 attorneys to review the transaction documents, and moved into a house that I believed, sincerely, completely, was ours. 4 months later, the letters began. The first claimed that the built-in kitchen cabinetry and antique hallway light fixtures were Lorraine's personal property, not included in the sale. They had been in that house for 30 years. They were part of the house when it was appraised. Neither had been listed as excluded in any document I had signed. The letter invented their exclusion in its entirety. Daniel called his mother. Lorraine said it was a misunderstanding and that her attorney had misread some documents. The letter, Daniel reported back, would go away. Did not go away. In January of 2023, a second letter arrived claiming a property boundary dispute. A portion of our property line had allegedly never been properly transferred. The affected area, according to Lorraine's attorney, included our driveway. Our driveway. We had our own survey completed. $4,200. It confirmed that the original property transfer was entirely correct and that no boundary error existed. Lorraine's attorney filed a counter-response. More fees. More time. More paper. And then the lease pendens letter arrived in March. And then one evening, arriving early to a family dinner and finding Lorraine's front door ajar, I heard her on the telephone. She was in the kitchen. She did not know I was in the entryway. She was speaking in the warm, satisfied voice of someone describing a plan that is working exactly as designed. She said, "Eventually they'll lose the house. When they do, they'll have nowhere to go. And then I'll finally have my family back where they belong." She said it contentedly. "The way you describe an outcome you have been engineering for a long time and now feel confident you are within range of achieving." I stood in the entryway. I listened. I waited until she moved to another room. Then I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I thought, she planned this before she ever proposed selling us the house. I did not cry. I drove home, opened a new spreadsheet, and called my attorney. Hindsight is a very specific kind of education. It doesn't teach you anything you didn't already know. It just shows you the cost of the excuses you made along the way. For 15 years I had been making excuses for Lorraine Whitmore, and now I went through them one by one. Year 1 of my marriage. Lorraine referred to Daniel and me at a family dinner in front of 8 people as the children. Daniel was 37 years old. I was 34. Nobody corrected her. I smiled and passed the bread. I told myself it was generational. Year 3. Lorraine decided our apartment was too small for proper entertaining and announced, without consulting us, that all major family holidays would be held at her house, managed according to her schedule and her preferences. This arrangement persisted for 12 years. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter, Lorraine at the head of the table, distributing compliments and subtle corrections in roughly equal measure, presiding over gatherings she had engineered to require her presence at their center. Year 5. Daniel was offered a significant business opportunity that would have required us to relocate for approximately 2 years. He turned it down. I didn't learn the actual reason until 2 years later, when he finally told me that Lorraine had called him 3 times in 1 week. She had told him that leaving would devastate her. She had said she would never forgive a son who chose financial ambition over his family. 3 phone calls. That was all it took for my husband to abandon an opportunity he had spent years working toward, and to say nothing to me about why. Year 8. Vanessa, Lorraine's daughter, my sister-in-law, had the first of her business failures. A boutique that lasted 14 months. Lorraine covered the losses, approximately $35,000, from Arthur's accounts. Arthur said nothing. I said nothing. I told myself it was her money to give. Year 11. Vanessa's second major financial crisis. Credit card debt that had accumulated to somewhere above $80,000. Lorraine covered it. Arthur said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business. Lorraine's favorite line at family gatherings, delivered with a laugh that invited everyone to laugh along. "One day you'll all come crawling back." She said it at least once a year. Everybody treated it as a joke. The kind of joke that requires mutual agreement that it isn't serious to function as a joke at all. It was not a joke. What I understand now, looking at 15 years compressed into a single clear frame, is that Lorraine's entire sense of self required being needed. Being central. Being the person around whom everything orbited. My marriage to Daniel had disrupted that gravity. I was competent and independent, and I handled things without her input, and she experienced my competence as a form of theft. She had decided at some point in those 15 years to reclaim what she had decided I had stolen. What she believed I had stolen was her son's complete and permanent dependency on her. She intended to restore it. Arthur Whitmore called me on a Thursday morning in April of 2023. He did not call Daniel. He called me specifically. He said, in that precise, carefully assembled way he has of speaking, "Arthur spends time with words before he releases them, which is a quality I have always respected. Evelyn, I need to show you something. Please come alone." I drove to the condo that afternoon. Arthur met me at the door. He looked different from the last time I'd seen him 3 weeks earlier. Not physically different. Something behind his eyes. The expression of a man who has been carrying a significant weight for a very long time and has finally decided that putting it down is worth whatever consequences follow. He made tea without asking whether I wanted any, which is something people do when they need a task to organize themselves around before a difficult conversation. He sat across from me. He said, "I owe you an apology. I have known what Lorraine was planning for longer than I should have permitted myself to stay quiet. I kept telling myself she would stop before it went too far. She did not stop. That is partly my fault and I am sorry for it." I said, "How long have you known?" He said, "Before the sale." He opened a locked drawer in his desk. I had been in that study more times than I could count over 15 years, and I had never once seen that drawer open. He placed a notebook on the table between us. Dark green cover. Standard composition. Lorraine's handwriting. I opened it. The first entry was dated January 14, 2021. 14 months before Lorraine proposed the sale to us. What I read in the following 40 minutes did not simply reframe the previous 2 years. It demolished the entire architecture of the story I had been telling myself about what had happened to us and why. Lorraine had not decided to sell the house and then subsequently devised a plan to reclaim it. She had written the plan first. The sale was the instrument. The entries were organized and systematic. She had projected the legal campaign required to create a manufactured ownership dispute. She had estimated the attorney fees we would incur. She had noted, in clinical language, how many months of sustained litigation it would take to deplete our financial reserves. The entry dated March 2021 read, "E will hold out longer than D. She's stubborn and she has savings. But no one survives a sustained legal campaign without real money, and she won't have real money left once the fees accumulate past 6 months. Estimate, 18 months from first notice to breaking point." She had analyzed my financial endurance. She had calculated my breaking point the way you calculate a supply chain timeline. Another entry, dated August 2021, 4 months before she proposed the sale, described the intended outcome with a specificity that I want you to hear clearly. D will come back to being my son once the independence is removed. He has no family nearby. No safety net. Once the house is gone and the savings are gone, they will have no choice. Once they're in my basement, they'll never leave. This is the only way to get my family back. This was never about money. It was never about property lines or cabinetry or fixture ownership. It was about a woman who could not tolerate independence in the people she believed belonged to her, and who had spent years constructing a mechanism to eliminate it. Arthur then produced 67 pages of printed text messages between Lorraine and Vanessa. He had documented them over time, screenshot by screenshot, because he had known what was being planned and had been gathering evidence while he decided what to do about it. Let me give you the ones that matter most. Vanessa to Lorraine, October 2022, 1 week after the first legal notice arrived. Did she call Daniel crying yet? Fine, Phil. He's tougher than I expected. But she's an accountant, not a litigator. She doesn't know what to do with this. Vanessa, what if they just fix whatever you're claiming and it doesn't go anywhere? Lorraine, then we find something else. There's always something else with a property this age. Gerald will keep looking. Vanessa, February 2023, after the boundary dispute filing. I told Mark that Evelyn and Daniel are probably going to lose the house. He said good riddance. Huh. Lorraine, don't get ahead of yourself. But yes, this is working. Give it 6 more months. Vanessa, 1 week later. Mom, what if Arthur finds out? Lorraine, Arthur won't find out. He doesn't pay attention to things he doesn't want to see. He never has. Arthur set the printed pages on the table between us and looked at me without speaking for a moment. Then he said, she was wrong about that. There was also a voicemail. Lorraine had accidentally left it on Arthur's phone in March of 2023, a misdial she apparently never realized she had made. Arthur had saved it, had it professionally transcribed, and had the transcription timestamp certified. Lorraine's voice in her own cadence saying, I don't care if they lose everything. I genuinely do not care. He took my son from me. He took my family. Everything that is happening to her right now she brought on herself, and I feel nothing about it. I sat with that for a while. Then Arthur produced the attorney consultation invoices. Dated records proving Lorraine had retained 2 different real estate litigation attorneys for strategic consultations in the months before the house sale was even proposed to us. She had paid professionals to design the campaign before she handed us the keys. I closed the folder. I looked at Arthur. I said, "What are you planning to do with all of this?" He said quietly, "I've already started." I had been protecting Daniel from the full picture while I gathered evidence and coordinated strategy with Arthur. He knew we were engaged in legal proceedings. He knew I was working with Patricia Chow, my attorney. He did not know the scale of what I had uncovered, because I needed him to behave naturally around his family while the trap was being assembled, and I was not yet certain that Daniel's version of natural behavior would hold under the weight of what I was about to show him. 3 weeks before Arthur's party, I sat Daniel down at our dining room table. I had the spreadsheet open, the notebook photographs, the printed text messages, the voicemail transcript, the attorney invoices, the complete picture organized chronologically the way I organize everything. I walked him through it all. He read slowly. He did not interrupt. He read the January 2021 entry. The first one, the plan, the calculated breaking point timeline. He read the text between his mother and his sister. He read Vanessa's message about telling her husband good riddance. He read his mother's February text. "This is working. Give it 6 more months." He got to the voicemail transcript. "I don't care if they lose everything. I genuinely do not care." He put it down on the table and did not pick it up again. He sat for a long time without speaking. I did not fill the silence. He needed to be in it. Then he said, "She started planning this before she sold us the house." "Yes." "She took our money and she kept planning." "Yes." He exhaled slowly through his nose, the way he does when something is landing that he can't quite organize into language yet. Then he said something that cost him something to say, and I could hear that it cost him. "Evelyn, I spent 15 years managing the space between you and her. I kept telling you it wasn't as bad as you thought, that you were being too sensitive, that if I handled it carefully enough she wouldn't go too far." I said, "She went too far." "Yes. And while I was carefully managing it, she was writing this in a notebook." He paused. "I made it easier. By keeping you from pushing back, I gave her more room. That's on me." I did not rush to reassure him. It was true, and he needed to sit with the truth of it without me immediately smoothing it over. After a while he said, "I want to do something. At the party. I don't want to just sit there." I said, "There will be a moment. You'll know it when it arrives. I don't want to script it for you because what you say in that moment needs to come from you, not from anything I wrote. It needs to be real." He looked at me. "It will be real." "I know," I said. He looked at the voicemail transcript one more time. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I called her 3 times to check in this week. I've been calling her twice a week for 15 years. This whole time I thought I was being a good son." He paused. "I was being a tool." I said, "You were being someone who loved his mother and didn't know how to stop. That's a kinder interpretation than I deserve right now." "I know," I said. "But it's still true." Here is where being a former accountant saves everything. Accountants think in systems. Inputs and outputs. Projected outcomes. You do not react to the column immediately in front of you. You model the full projection and plan for the result several moves ahead. You hold the number in your head while appearing to respond to a different number entirely. After Arthur and I had established our strategy and Patricia Chow had confirmed the legal package was sound, I went home and did something that required more discipline than anything else I have ever done. I acted scared. I told Daniel the legal situation was exhausting me, that the costs were mounting, that I didn't know how much longer we could sustain the fight. I needed him to reflect a version of this to his family, not as a performance but as the partial truth it was. I was exhausted. I was not, however, defeated. That distinction was the entire strategy, and I needed Lorraine to miss it. She missed it completely. Over the following 3 months, the legal package was assembled in full. Patricia's team authenticated the text message thread through a digital forensics process that ensured evidentiary integrity. The voicemail was professionally transcribed with timestamp certification from an independent lab. The attorney consultation invoices were cross-referenced with Lorraine's claimed timeline of events. Arthur, in addition to everything else he had compiled, was executing a specific legal step that I will not describe until it is time for you to hear it. Meanwhile, Lorraine was winning, or believed she was. She began reporting to relatives that Evelyn and Daniel were struggling financially. She described it with the particular sorrow of a mother who had tried to help and was now watching the consequences of her children's poor choices unfold. She managed the narrative with the fluency of someone who has been doing it so long it no longer requires effort. At the church spring fundraiser in May, she told 3 of her committee colleagues that our house situation had become complicated, and that foreclosure was not impossible. She said she was praying for them. She received sympathy in return. Several people who had attended my wedding updated their opinion of me based entirely on information they received from the woman who was manufacturing my financial crisis. Friends stopped calling. A cousin of Daniel's sent a diplomatic message, checking in, that I recognized immediately as the product of a conversation with Lorraine. One neighbor who I had considered a genuine acquaintance stopped making eye contact at the mailbox. Lorraine had been busy. Vanessa, emboldened by the apparent progress, began operating with the recklessness of someone who has decided an outcome is already locked in. At a family birthday dinner for one of Daniel's cousins, a dinner I did not attend for obvious reasons, Vanessa apparently told 3 people at her table that I was probably panicking right now, and that the whole situation could have been avoided if Evelyn hadn't been so proud. She said the house should have stayed in the family, which is a sentence that requires you to forget that we had purchased it with money we earned. She said all of this while carrying a wine glass and wearing shoes that cost more than my first month's mortgage payment. Daniel came home from that dinner quiet. He told me what had been said. Then he said, "I didn't defend you." I said nothing. I said, "For now that's exactly right." He said, "I hate that it's exactly right." "I know," I said. "For more weeks." The problem with entitlement is that it requires a constant audience. Lorraine had spent 15 years as the gravitational center of her family's universe. 3 months of watching me appear to be losing was not sufficiently satisfying. She needed witnesses. She needed the people whose opinion mattered to her to see her prevail. She started making the mistake that people like her always eventually make. She started talking too much to too many people with too much specific detail. In June of 2023, she told Daniel directly that she believed the best outcome for everyone involved would be for us to step back from the house voluntarily. She framed this as a generous offer. She said she was willing to be flexible about the timeline for our departure. She presented herself as a reasonable woman who was simply trying to help her son avoid further financial damage. What she was actually presenting was a request that we surrender $537,000 in assets and move into whatever controlled arrangement she had prepared for us. Daniel came home and told me exactly what she'd said. Then he said, "I told her I needed to think about it." I said, "Good." He said, "I'm not thinking about it." I know. 1 week later, Vanessa called me directly. This was unusual. Vanessa and I did not have a phone relationship. She called from a number I didn't immediately recognize and opened the conversation with the false warmth she deploys when she wants something she knows she shouldn't ask for directly. She said, "Evelyn, I just wanted to check in. I know things have been hard." I said, "Things have been interesting." She said, "I think, and this is just between us, I think the situation could be resolved really cleanly if you and Daniel were willing to just let the house go. Mom would make sure you were taken care of. You'd have a place to stay and you wouldn't have these legal bills piling up." She paused. "Sometimes the graceful thing is knowing when to let go." I let a moment pass. Then I said, "Vanessa, I appreciate the call." She said, "I just think." I said, "I'll be in touch." I hung up. I added the call to my documentation log with the date, time, and a summary of what she'd said. Then I went back to checking the folder print count. Arthur's birthday was 3 weeks away. Arthur's 74th birthday celebration was held on a Saturday evening in July at the Whitmore family's longtime community center, a space the family had used for events going back 20 years. Lorraine had organized it herself. She had selected the caterer, the florals, the seating chart, the evening program. She had written the guest list. She had, in short, built a stage for herself and populated it with the audience she wanted. 60 guests attended. Extended family across 2 branches. Church members. Neighbors who had known Arthur for decades. His former professional colleagues from his years as a real estate attorney. Business associates. The committee chairs and board members who populated Lorraine's charitable world. Every person whose opinion she valued in a single room on a single evening. I arrived 45 minutes early. Arthur's nephew Carl, who worked in AV production and had agreed without asking questions when Arthur explained what was needed, had the projector calibrated and the laptop connected. The files were organized in sequence. I had prepared 55 printed folders, bound at a copy shop 2 days earlier, 1 per guest. Each folder contained a 1-page timeline of the house sale and subsequent legal actions, a 2-page summary of the financial damages the campaign had cost us, key excerpts from the notebook and text messages, and a cover page bearing a single line, what Lorraine Whitmore planned for her son's family in her own words. I placed 1 folder face down at each table setting before guests arrived. The way you place a program at a formal dinner. Nobody questions face-down materials at an event. Lorraine arrived at 7 o'clock precisely, which told me she was eager. She wore the dusty rose silk blouse. Her hair was done. She moved through the room the way she always moves through rooms she has designed for herself. With ownership, greeting people by name, touching arms, deploying the warm laugh she uses when she wants to remind a room that she is beloved. She crossed the room and found me near the entrance. She smiled. The specific smile she had been giving me for 3 months. The smile that said, "I know exactly where this is going and there is nothing you can do about it." She took my arm the way she does and said quietly, "I hope you've been giving serious thought to our conversation, Evelyn. The offer is still on the table. But these things have a natural expiration." She meant the offer to surrender our home voluntarily. I said, "I've been thinking about it constantly, Lorraine." She patted my arm with the gentle satisfaction of a woman who has confused politeness for defeat. Then she moved on to her next guest. Vanessa found me 20 minutes later. Wine glass. The confident posture of someone who believes a situation is resolved. She said without preamble, "I heard you're finally being reasonable about the house." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Tonight is going to settle a lot of things." She raised an eyebrow as though I had said something slightly confused and moved on. Dinner was served. The room settled into the comfortable noise of 60 people who believe they are attending a birthday party. The caterers moved efficiently. The floral arrangements were beautiful. Lorraine had not cut corners on the staging. The DJ played background music at a volume that allowed conversation. Lorraine moved from table to table like a woman receiving tribute. At 8:30 the program called for speeches. 3 guests offered brief, genuine tributes to Arthur. His constancy, his dry humor, the specific way he listened when you were trying to work through a problem. Arthur sat at the head table and accepted the warmth gracefully. He is not a man who performs gratitude, so when he shows it, it is unmistakably real. Lorraine sat beside him, smiling, receiving reflected warmth as though it were also intended for her. She had scheduled this portion of the evening. She had approved the speakers. The proceedings were unfolding exactly as she had designed them. Then Arthur stood. He did not wait for the designated MC. He picked up the microphone himself and the room applauded instinctively, because the birthday honoree was rising to speak. Arthur said, "Thank you all for coming tonight. 74 years is a long time to be paying attention, and I've been trying to identify what I've learned in that time that is actually worth saying out loud." The room settled. Comfortable. Expectant. He said, "I've learned that silence is sometimes kindness. And sometimes it is cowardice. I have spent too many years confusing the two. I am not going to do that anymore." The room adjusted. Not dramatically, just a slight shift in posture, a subtle recalibration. People who were relaxed became attentive. Arthur said, "Before we continue this celebration, there are things that the people in this room deserve to know. About what has been happening in this family. About what has been done in this family's name. I owe several people an honest account, and I owe one person in particular something that I should have provided much sooner." Lorraine's smile did not vanish. It froze. Her face made the micro-adjustment it makes when a social situation is moving in a direction she did not engineer and has not prepared for. Arthur looked toward the AV table. Carl pressed a key. The projector screen lit up behind him. The first image was not a photograph. It was a scanned page from the notebook, enlarged to fill the screen, Lorraine's handwriting unmistakable to anyone in that room who had received so much as a birthday card from her. Dated January 14, 2021. Arthur said, "In January of 2021, 14 months before my wife proposed selling the family home to our son and his wife, she began writing a plan. This is page 1 of that plan." He read from it directly. The projected legal campaign. The estimated timeline. The words estimate, 18 months from first notice to breaking point. At the third table from the front, a woman picked up her folder. She opened it the way people open something they already sense will be difficult. Lorraine said, "Arthur, this is not the time or the place for." Arthur said, "Lorraine, I have been waiting for the right time for 2 years. I have decided this is it. Please do not interrupt me." He said it without volume and without drama. The authority in it came from somewhere much older than the room, and the room felt it. Lorraine closed her mouth. Arthur clicked to the next slide. Text messages. Time-stamped. The thread between Lorraine and Vanessa, formatted and printed with dates and times visible. He read them aloud. 3 of them in sequence. The exchange about whether Evelyn had called Daniel crying yet. Lorraine's assessment. She's an accountant, not a litigator. She doesn't know what to do with this. Then Vanessa's question about whether it was working and Lorraine's answer. Yes. Give it 6 more months. A man near the center of the room set down his fork. He looked at his wife. She was already looking at her folder. Arthur said, "Between October 2022 and June 2023, my wife and her daughter launched 3 separate legal actions against Daniel and Evelyn. A fixture ownership claim, a manufactured property boundary dispute, and a lease pendens notice designed to freeze their asset and create the conditions for foreclosure. The total legal cost to my son and his wife, $22,000 in attorney fees, $17,000 in surveys, counterfilings and responses. A total exposure of $537,000 at risk." He paused. Every one of those legal actions was fabricated. The room was quiet. The particular quiet of people who have understood what they are looking at and are deciding how to respond to it. Arthur clicked to the next slide. Attorney consultation invoices. Dated. The law firm name. The billing codes. Proof that Lorraine had retained 2 different real estate litigation attorneys for strategic consultations in the months before the house sale was proposed to us. The former real estate attorney near the back, one of Arthur's professional colleagues, a man who had reviewed thousands of property litigation documents in his career, picked up his copy of the folder and read it. His jaw set in a specific way. Arthur said, "She paid for professional advice on how to construct a legal campaign against her own son and his wife before she handed them the keys to a house she charged them $430,000 to purchase." Several people at different tables were now actively reading the folders. Vanessa stood up. She said, "These documents are being taken completely out of context. This is a gross misrepresentation of a complicated legal situation, and you do not have the full picture of what." Arthur said, "Vanessa, sit down." Vanessa sat. He clicked to the next slide. The voicemail transcript. Full text. The timestamp certification at the top. The date, March 2023. Arthur read it aloud. "I don't care if they lose everything. I genuinely do not care. He took my son from me. He took my family. Everything that is happening to her right now she brought on herself, and I feel nothing about it." From the back of the room a woman said quietly but audibly, "Oh my God." Patricia Sayers, Lorraine's church colleague and dearest friend of 9 years, who had introduced Lorraine at charity events as the most generous woman I know, set her folder down on the table in front of her. She did not pick it up again. She looked at the tablecloth. A woman at the fourth table stood up and relocated to a different seat. She did not look at Lorraine as she moved. She simply chose a different chair, as though the proximity had become uncomfortable. 3 people near the windows were showing each other passages in their folders. Their voices were low. Lorraine said, "Everything I have ever done has been for this family. Every decision I made was for the people in this room. I gave everything I had to." Arthur said calmly, "Lorraine, I have one more thing to show." He clicked to the final slide. A document I had not seen until this moment. Arthur had prepared it through his own legal contacts without mentioning it to me. A detail I understood now was intentional, because my genuine surprise in that moment was its own kind of testimony. A notarized agreement. Witnessed by 2 signatories. Recorded with the county clerk's office on June 3, 2023. 6 weeks before this party. Arthur read from it. This agreement specifies that in the event Lorraine Whitmore's legal actions, whether undertaken directly through Vanessa Whitmore, or through any third party acting on her instruction, result in documented financial damages to Daniel and Evelyn Harper relating to the property sold in 2022, Arthur Whitmore personally guarantees compensation to Evelyn Harper equivalent to his managed investment account, currently valued at $500,000, and his personal trust assets, currently valued at $300,000. He lowered the document. $800,000, he said. "I had this prepared because I knew exactly what my wife was planning, and I wanted to ensure that she could not succeed. I did it quietly without telling anyone, because I wanted it to be real protection rather than a warning she could work around." He looked at the room. "I trusted my daughter-in-law more than I trusted my own wife to do right by this family. That is the most painful sentence I have ever had to say. It is also the most true." Lorraine erupted. She pushed back her chair. It hit the table behind her hard enough that the glassware rattled, and she stood up and she pointed at me, and then she pointed at Arthur, and then she pointed at the screen, and the words coming out of her were not sentences anymore. They were fragments. "Betrayal, and ungrateful, and after everything I have sacrificed, and you have no idea what she has done to this family." She swept her arm toward the guests around her and said, "You don't know the full story. None of you know what it has been like, what she has put us through, what I have endured as a mother." Nobody moved toward her. Robert and Claire Anderton, neighbors Lorraine had seated near the front because she considered them social capital, were both reading their folders with their heads down. Patricia Sayers had turned her chair slightly so that she was no longer facing the head table directly. The real estate attorney near the back had passed his copy of the notarized agreement to the woman beside him and was explaining something to her in a low voice. From her expression she understood it clearly. Vanessa grabbed her folder, looked at it, and set it back down. Then she stood up and walked toward the exit. She did not say goodbye. She did not look at her mother. She crossed the room and went through the door and did not come back. Lorraine turned to Daniel. She said, "Daniel, tell them. Tell them what I gave up for you. Tell them how much I have sacrificed. Tell them who was there for this family when no one else was." Daniel stood up. He did not look at me first. He did not look at Arthur. He stood from his chair and he looked at his mother, and the room went quiet in a way that was different from all the other silences of that evening. The specific quiet of people who understand that what is about to be said will be permanent. He said, "Mom, I have let you manage me for my whole life. I turned down a career opportunity 12 years ago because you called me every day for 2 weeks until I agreed with you, and I told my wife I turned it down for other reasons because I was ashamed to tell her the truth. I stood in the middle of every conflict between you and Evelyn and called it keeping the peace, when what I was actually doing was protecting you from consequences and leaving her without a partner. I told her she was too sensitive. I told her she misunderstood you. I minimized 15 years of what she saw clearly because I did not want to believe it." He paused. "I read the notebook, Mom. I read every page. I read the part where you calculated how long it would take to break her financially. I read the part where you said once we were in your basement we would never leave." The room was completely still. Daniel said, "I am standing with my wife. I am standing with my father. And I want every person in this room to know that what has been shown tonight is the truth, and that I am not confused about which side of it I belong on." He sat down. Lorraine's mouth opened, then closed. The performance that had sustained her for 67 years, the warm, devoted, sacrificing mother, was not available to her for this moment. There was no script for a room full of witnesses watching her own son choose his wife over her, publicly, after everything she had done to prevent exactly that. She sat down. Not gracefully. The way a person sits when their body has simply stopped accepting instructions. Arthur walked across the room to where I was standing. He said quietly, "I'm sorry it took me this long." I said, "You got there." He nodded once, the way he nods when a thing is settled. We stood together and we watched the room make its decisions. If you believe earned justice is better than keeping the peace, drop a comment and subscribe. Because what happened in the following 30 minutes was 6 decades of social currency spent in a single room in a single evening. The charity committee chair, a woman who had worked beside Lorraine on 3 separate boards for 9 years, approached Arthur. She shook his hand. She said something to him quietly that I did not hear. She did not look at Lorraine as she left. 4 of the church group members left together in a quiet cluster. They collected their coats without stopping at the head table. One of them, passing Daniel, touched his arm briefly and kept walking. Robert Anderton stopped beside Daniel on his way out. He said, "I'm sorry. We were told a different version of events." He looked toward where Lorraine was sitting. Then he looked back at Daniel. "I'm sorry," he said again and left. 2 women who had, in the preceding months, repeated Lorraine's narrative about our financial struggles to people in their shared social network were sitting very still with their folders open, not speaking to each other. Lorraine's book club colleague, a woman named Helen who had known her for 22 years, walked to where Patricia Sayers was sitting and said something. Patricia responded. They left the room together through a side door without passing the head table. By 9:15 the room had thinned by more than half. The caterers had begun the quiet, professional work of clearing plates. The DJ had turned off the music without being asked. The florals Lorraine had spent time selecting sat in the diminished light of a room that had become something entirely different from the occasion she had planned. Lorraine sat at the head table for 40 minutes. Then she left. Nobody walked her out. I want to tell you what justice actually looks like because it is not a single satisfying moment. It is a series of dominoes falling in a specific order over a specific period of time, and the sound they make is very quiet and very permanent. Within 2 weeks of the party, Patricia Sayers had ended her involvement with 3 charitable organizations she and Lorraine had co-led. Her name was removed from the letterhead. Lorraine's followed 6 weeks later when the boards, populated by the same community that had been in that room, asked for her resignation. Not demanded, asked. Which in certain social environments is a significantly more devastating communication. Arthur filed for divorce in August of 2023. The proceedings revealed that the $180,000 in personal debt Lorraine had secretly accumulated, money she had used a portion of our house purchase price to partially service, had been generated through accounts that constituted a violation of their marital financial agreement. Arthur, as a former real estate attorney, understood precisely what the documentation demonstrated and what it was worth in a negotiation. The settlement stripped Lorraine of access to his assets, the investment accounts, the trust. The financial foundation she had assumed was permanent because she had never considered that Arthur was paying attention. She was left with her condo, her personal accounts, and $180,000 in outstanding debt. She sold the condo 14 months after the party. Vanessa's situation moved faster, because the authenticated text message thread was sufficient to support a civil fraud claim regarding her participation in the manufactured legal campaign. Civil judgments followed. Combined with her existing credit card debt, a failed business lease she had personally guaranteed, and the loans from Lorraine that now had no prospect of resolution, bankruptcy was filed in October of 2023. Her husband, whose lifestyle had been built in part on the expectation of Vanessa's eventual inheritance from a woman who was now being sued, filed for separation in January of 2024. I received word through a mutual connection that Vanessa had moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood considerably different from the one she had been living in. Her adult children from a previous relationship had reduced contact substantially, largely because the financial transfers she had been making to them over the years had stopped. When the money stopped, the calls became less frequent. This is its own particular variety of justice, and I confess I feel it fully. The legal settlements, when they finalized, exceeded my projections. The civil judgment against Lorraine for the fraudulent legal campaign covered our $22,000 in attorney fees, our $17,000 in additional costs, and substantial compensatory damages. Arthur's notarized guarantee, presented within the formal probate review of the estate assets, provided the basis for a court-issued protective order in my favor on the investment accounts. Total financial recovery, $1.1 million. I purchased the waterfront property in September of 2024. $950,000. For bedrooms. A west-facing deck where the evening light crosses the water and does something different every single night. Something I still haven't found the right word for after 8 months of watching it and deciding it doesn't need one. There is no drama in this house. No certified letters from attorneys I haven't contacted. No person alive who can call and claim that my cabinetry or my property line belongs to them. No one whose voice I hear in the morning that I didn't choose to have there. Daniel is here. He is doing the slow, uncomfortable work that slow and uncomfortable work requires. Understanding what 15 years of conflict avoidance costs the person who is standing beside you while you practice it. We are not fully past it. I don't know precisely when or whether we will be. What I know is that I watched him stand up in front of 60 people and choose, publicly and clearly and without a script, and I know what that required of him, and I know it was not nothing. Arthur visits. He brought a casserole in October, which made me laugh for the first time in what felt like a very long while. He sits on the deck in the evenings. He doesn't say much. He is not a man who fills silence with unnecessary language, which is one of the reasons I trust him. Lorraine wrote 3 letters. Long letters, handwritten, the same penmanship I had spent 15 years seeing on Christmas cards and birthday notes. She wrote about grief. About family. About how she had only ever wanted to keep her children close. She wrote about regret in the general atmospheric way that people write about regret when they are unwilling to name the specific things they regret. She did not write about the $537,000 she had tried to take from me. She did not write about the voicemail. She did not write about the notebook entry where she had projected my financial breaking point with the precision of a business model. I read all 3 letters. I did not respond to any of them. Vanessa called once from a number I didn't immediately recognize. She did not apologize. She explained that her circumstances had become very difficult and asked whether there might be some possibility of a private arrangement, which is a phrase that means money, to help stabilize things. She framed it as a request between family members. I said, "We're not family anymore, Vanessa." I hung up. Neither of them contacted me again. I have been asked whether I feel guilt, whether zero forgiveness is too absolute, whether there is some version of this story where I eventually open the door, even a crack, in the direction of reconciliation. Here is what I know. Lorraine did not have a moment of poor judgment that escalated beyond her intentions. She did not make one bad decision that produced consequences she didn't foresee. She sat in a room in January of 2021 and opened a notebook and wrote down a plan. She executed that plan methodically over 2 years, involving her daughter, consulting multiple attorneys, managing the social narrative around her, and leaving a voicemail in which she stated plainly that she did not care if we lost everything. She was precise about her intentions. I believed her. The door is closed. The lock is turned. I have no intention of standing anywhere near it. For 15 years I thought keeping the peace made me a good person. I thought swallowing the small humiliations, the dinner table dynamics, the holiday arrangements, the quiet erosion of my husband's ambitions, the invisible labor of a family that noticed its results and forgot its source, was what love and loyalty required. I thought patience was the price of peace, and that if I paid it long enough, something resembling respect would eventually arrive. It was not coming. It was never coming. What Lorraine saw in 15 years of my compliance was not loyalty she should reciprocate. It was confirmation that I could be managed. That with enough pressure in the right places I would eventually fold. She was operating from a model of me that was 15 years out of date. And she made one miscalculation she never recovered from. She forgot to account for the quiet man who had been watching her from across a kitchen table for 47 years, who had finally decided that silence and cowardice were no longer things he was willing to confuse with each other. She forgot that her son, despite 15 years of practicing avoidance, was capable of standing up. And she forgot to account for me. I am an accountant. I keep records of everything, including the records that prove what someone tried to do to me, and the records that prove they failed. The sunset through my west-facing windows is different every single evening. I have not missed one yet. And somewhere, in a space considerably smaller than the life she planned for herself, a woman who spent 2 years trying to put me in her basement sits alone with her unread letters and her unanswered calls and the very complete silence of everyone she ever tried to control. She wanted her family back where they belonged. She got exactly what control always produces, eventually when it runs out of things to hold. Nothing. The day I stopped keeping the peace for people who were using my peacefulness against me was the day my life finally became mine. Close the door. Lock it. Never open it again.